collaboration. But what I want to suggest is that we, in relationship to South Africa and among ourselves, begin to reflect upon the nature of solidarity. Solidarity is a collective emotion. It is a feeling. It is a certain sensibility, but also a certain sensitivity. It is not pity. It is not condescension. And I want to suggest that if we begin to try to figure out how to encourage solidarity, that we may at least lay the basis for dealing with what are the hardest times I have seen in my entire life. And I'll be 48 years old next month. So that's a little while. It's a little while. You know, and I was on the FBI's 10 most wanted criminal list. You know, I have been shot at. I have dealt with the LAPD. And I can tell you some stories. I could really tell you some stories. But I've never been scared as I'm scared today. But at the same time, I've never felt as excited about the possibilities of creating something that will bring about lasting change. When you look at the economy, the increasing lack of judicial remedies, the backlash with respect to women's rights, AIDS, Magic Johnson, who everyone described as being very courageous when he stepped out there and said he was HIV positive. But then why does he have to keep making the point that he's straight? I mean, so what if he is straight? So what? I mean, it is as if what appeared at first to be building some bridges is now destroying them. Because he is issuing an invitation to people to support him and all of the other unfortunate heterosexuals who happen to become HIV positive. There is a relationship between AIDS and hate violence. It has increased the incidence of hate violence against the gay community. And I say this as I share with you some of my own personal experiences. A very, very close friend of mine died of AIDS on Tuesday night. And this friend, who was a student of mine back in 1977, had visited me in the Bay Area, and one of the last times he visited me, he was beaten up by people who were only out there to beat up some, quote, faggots. And I'm talking about black people, young black people beating up on a young black gay man. So I say this because when we talk about this hate violence, it is not as if we have these separate, rigid communities and all of us are targets. We don't like to use the word victim now. And then there are those over there that are perpetrators. Some of us who are targets are also perpetrators. And we've got to deal with that as well. In 1992, Native people will be at the forefront of an intense ideological challenge to the history of this land on which we all live. It will be a pivotal year, even more so than 1976, the bicentennial year. It brought out David Duke, And look who's out again. The ultimate meaning of the bicentennial was captured, I think, in that image right here in Boston of a white man attacking a black man with a massive American flag, a massive, become monstrous American flag. 1992 will mark 500 years of indigenous resistance. One of the goals we can set for ourselves, I think, is to identify with the tradition of American indigenous resistance and to begin to create models of solidarity which would not only help us to understand the interweavings and intersections that bring us together, but that will help us to fight back, to be able to take on the horizons of genocide in a unified way. I want to say to my sisters and brothers, I want to be able to say to my sisters and brothers in South Africa as they move ahead with the process of creating a new constitution and a new government. I want to be able to say to my native gay brother, I want my Jewish sister to say to me, or to her Arab brother, you can trust me. I got your back. You can trust me. I got your back. Thank you.
Professor Davis will take a few questions. There are microphones here to my left, to my right. We ask that you please line up at the microphones. Keep your questions short. And let's go. We'll start on the left and just go back and forth.
Hi. I just want to ask you, how instrumental do you think the relationship between Cuba and South Africa is, and how do you feel about the meeting between Mandela and Castro?
I think that the statement recently made by the ANC indicating support for Cuba is very important. And let me say that with the socialist world having collapsed, and as a communist, it is profoundly sad for me to see the collapsing of the socialist world, although I recognize that there were problems that could not be solved within the structures that were created by that particular process, which is not to say that socialism is dead. It is not to say that socialism is dead. And I can also share with you the fact that even within the Communist Party in this country, what remains of the Communist Party is not very much that's left. There was just a convention last weekend in which those of us who had signed and circulated an initiative calling for democratic renewal within the structures of the Communist Party in this country were not even allowed to run for office, so that you're talking about people like Herbert Aptaker, whom some of you may know, you may have read his work, who's been a member of the leadership body of the Communist Party for I don't know how many years. He was basically booted out. All of us were. And, you know, that to me is something that's, I've depended on people within that activist organization to nurture me as an activist. And I think it is because of my continued membership in the Communist Party, even with all of the problems that existed, and even though we've been fighting on the inside as well as the outside, that has kept me sort of clear about what I need to be doing with my life. It's kept me in touch with real movements, with real political practice. Yeah, oh, hey, we're already scheming about what we're going to do. I mean, we will build something else. Socialism is not dead. And in my opinion, you know, Cuba and the courageousness of the people of Cuba, even though there are enormous problems in Cuba, I would not attempt to defend everything that goes on in the Cuban government. And I think there needs to be some renewal and a lot of things there. But I am going to stand together with my Cuban sisters and brothers. I defend their right to exist and their right to determine their own destiny.
If there were time, I'd want to ask you about George and Jonathan Jackson. And I'd want to ask you about what you learned from Herbert Marcuse, but there isn't time. I would like to hear your...
I could
yes, okay,
say it.
all right.
I would like to answer those questions
okay,
now that you
okay,
posed them.
Okay. I think the best way we can celebrate 1992 is first and foremost to free Leonard Peltier. And lest anybody forget, it was the CIA that let the South African government know where Nelson Mandela was.
You're absolutely right.
And the CIA is going to be here at Harvard this coming Wednesday. And the leaflet that I was told not to... Yeah. Yes, it is.
No, I think this is important because I would like to hear what's going on this campus. And I think he's made some very... You know, I'm very glad. I have to be self-critical because I meant to say that we should set for ourselves the goal of freeing Leonard in 1992. So I'm thankful to you for having,
Thank you.
yeah, you got my back.
Right, no, I was just trying to give you an opportunity to talk about something I knew you would want to.
Well, thank you. What's it, see? I mean, you said it.
When you mentioned Bush and having been a director of the CIA is going to be here this coming Wednesday. For anyone who may have seen a flyer that was distributed, check your local listings because I looked in the Harvard Gazette and it is not at 4 o'clock apparently. According to the Gazette, it's going to be at noon. So if you saw the flyer that I was told I could not be distributed here, it's
at noon?
It's at noon,
Where?
not at Coolidge Hall.
Okay, there's a demonstration against the CIA at noon on...
It's coming Wednesday.
When? On
You're
Wednesday, December 18th, noon, demonstrate against the CIA, Coolidge Hall, right? Okay. And, okay,
Well,
do you
all
want me to respond to the first points?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay, briefly. You know, because, of course, it's not possible to say everything. And, you know, there used to be a time when I thought I could, you know, basically say what I wanted to say in a speech, and of course you can't. So I appreciate the fact that you did bring up Jonathan Jackson, who was also killed at the Marin County Courthouse shootout, which resulted in charges being brought against me for murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy, because guns that were registered in my name were used by Jonathan Jackson to go into the courthouse. Jonathan Jackson was, of course, a very young man, 17 years old, whose brother, George Jackson, had been in prison for 10 years as a result of having been convicted as an 18-year-old of robbing $70 from a gas station. And George said that he didn't even know his friends were planning to rob the gas station. He said, I mean, he did do some criminal things, he said, in his life, but he was not in on this robbery. As an 18-year-old, he was given a sentence of from 1 year to life, an indeterminate sentence, and was in 10 years before he was killed on August 21st, 1971. Jonathan was killed on August 7th, 1970, holding weapons that were registered in my name, which I had bought because of the enormous the threats and the assaults on my life that emanated from Reagan's manipulation of my membership in the Communist Party. So that during the trial I had notebooks and notebooks of letters that had been sent to me by people who were threatening me, who were telling me they were going to kill me, or telling me to go back to Africa, or go back to Russia, or do something. And the reason I'm glad you mentioned, you sort of conjured up their spirit, is because Jonathan Jackson's son, whose name is also Jonathan Jackson, is a student at UC Berkeley now and very active in the black movement on the campus. So, that legacy is still, very much here. And I know she's going to be very embarrassed when I say that my niece, who's named after me, Angela, although everybody calls her Issa, that she's sitting right there. And I know she's not going to stand up. But I was just remembering that she was born one day after my sister had been visiting me in the cell where I was being held in solitary confinement. And my sister had a big fight with the deputies. And then that evening, Issa came out. So she has some of that legacy of fighting spirit as well. And I think that that's very important, because I see this generation as being a lot more politically conscious and having a much more profound political impulse than the generation before you. And it has something to do with who your parents were. Which is not to say that you should reduplicate what we did. No, by no means. Which is to say that your burden is much heavier. You've got to, take it much further than we could even envision taking it. Just as we took it. I mean, I've been thinking about, I guess, when you get older, you start thinking about, these things. It didn't occur to me when I was young that somehow I had inherited my mother's activism. I knew that she had been involved in the Scottsboro 9 case, and she had been in the NAACP and an officer and in the Southern Youth. She had done all of that, but it didn't seem to have anything to do with what I was doing. You know what I'm saying? Now I realize it had a lot to do with what I was doing. And hopefully young people today realize, and hopefully they can be intergenerational dialogue in a different kind of way this time around, because I think we really need it. And so therefore to raise the names of George Jackson and Jonathan Jackson reminds me of my responsibility to continue to try to engage in that intergenerational dialogue. What did I learn from Herbert Marcuse? I can say in a very few words what I really learned. Of course, I learned a lot, but Herbert Marcuse taught me that it was possible to be an academic and an activist, a scholar and a revolutionary. And I learned that. Let me tell you at what moment that struck me with such force. I was involved in organizing on the campus of UCSD, University of California, San Diego, a movement back in the late 60s, which brought together the black students, the Chicano students, and the progressive white students who identified with working class people. And we were demanding a college. We wanted a college. They were about to construct the third college. We said the name of this college is going to be Lumumba Zapata College. Oh, yes. And we developed a curriculum.
It's a good name.
And we were serious. We wanted to demonstrate the extent to which we were serious. We decided to occupy the registrar's office, or the administration building. So I went to Marcuse and told him about our plans. And I told him we had some problems because we knew that we could be kicked out of school. You know, I was a graduate student, and that didn't bother me that much then, although I'm glad I didn't get kicked out of school. And so I told him we needed some support. We needed some support from other areas. And I asked him whether he would come with us. He said, sure, of course. I mean, he was, how old was he? He was maybe 75 years old then. No question about it, of course. And as a matter of fact, when we took over the building, we had to we had to kick in the door, break the glass, and the first person to occupy the building, the first person to set foot into the building was Herbert Marcuse. So I said that was the moment when it became clear to me that I did not have to assume that to be one, I had to give up the other.
Thank you. Glad to have you here.
Yes, you mentioned that socialism is not dead, and as a communist I would agree 100%. But what the problem is that Stalinism is what's dying now. And I think you mentioned that the recent problems in the Communist Party and what is going on with bureaucratism and whatnot, that's all well and true that there's bureaucratism in the Communist Party, but I think you have to examine the program of what is causing what is going on in this society today, worldwide, the extreme, hideous violence, not only in South Africa, as you mentioned, but in this country and the rest of the capitalist world. And that's one thing you didn't mention in your talk, was the question of capitalism. And you talk about solidarity, but I think you have to look at solidarity with whom and for what purpose. The point is the Communist Party... Yes, I do have a question.
Okay, would you... because I think...
Okay, I'll get to my question.
I know you have some points that you want to make.
Yes, the point is the Communist Party has continually channeled votes historically into the Democratic Party, which in this country represents, like the Republican Party, a party of racism and war and imperialism.
Up here so everybody can see you?
I would like to finish my sentence, okay? I'll finish my comments. You have to examine that. As a member of the Communist Party, you cannot deny that the Communist Party's record has been continually not for workers' revolution, but for reforming capitalism, whether it comes to calling for banning the Klan, calling on this racist capitalist government to ban the Klan.
As Professor Davis said, do you have a question?
Yes, I'd like to know why you refuse to
I understand that you have an agenda, and I mean, that's fine, that's your agenda. But the fact is, I did not give a speech on the Communist Party, and if you would like to enter into a dialogue about that, perhaps we can decide on a place and a time, and I would be happy to sit down and talk to you about the Communist Party. I don't think it's really appropriate in this context because most of the people here are not members of your organization, nor have they followed the history of the Communist Party. So
Well, you are giving a talk on a political subject which is extremely important to all of us, and we have to discuss.
Is
The
there a
Spartacus
question?
League, which I am a member of, would be happy to debate the Communist Party anytime. But I would like to know one thing.
I'm not in the leadership position. I'm not a member of the Communist Party any longer. I thought I made that point clear. Did I? I mean, that's why...
No, if you're not a member of the Communist Party, I'm saying that you still have to take responsibility for the positions and the program that you spoke about tonight.
You know, let me say this. I'm all for free speech. I really am. I'm all for democratic dialogue. But it seems to me that the points that you are making would be more appropriately made in a different context. I mean, that is all that I'm saying. I am not prepared to enter into a dialogue with you now. Under these conditions, we have about 5 more minutes for questions.
Okay, so my question, since we've gotten sidetracked, is basically on the question of fighting racism in this country. Do you still call for banning the Klan, for calling on the racist American government to ban the Klan? As opposed to the Spartacus position of organizing for labor black mobilizations to organize like we did in March against David Duke to stop the Klan from organizing.
Okay. I think that to respond to what the last part of her question, the fight to... And actually, I'm glad she posed that question because it reminded me of something that I had wanted to say that I did not say. So thank you very much. There is a law against genocide that was recently enacted in this country. Are all of you aware of the law against genocide, the Proxmire Act? That came in the aftermath of the ratification of the 1948, I think it was, Convention to End Genocide, passed by the United Nations. The U.S. government did not ratify that convention until a few years ago, but now it has been ratified. By the way, Paul Robeson and William L. Patterson in 1951 approached the United Nations with a petition against genocide. So this struggle has a great deal of history. There is now an act designed to implement this Convention against Genocide. And what I want to suggest is we think about utilizing this act in order to prosecute individuals and organizations that can, I think, be found guilty now of promoting genocide. It is very specific. If you'd like to look at the text, you can find it in a number of places. The petition to the United Nations in 1951 is available in a book called We Charge Genocide. That book contains the entire text of the convention. The National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, of which I am the co-chair, published a pamphlet detailing the Proxmire Act. So if any of you are interested in that, you can give me your name and address, and I will send you a copy of that brochure. But the answer to your question is yes. We should attempt to fight back against the David Dukes and the Klan and the Aryan Nation and all of those organizations that are organized expressions of the will to commit genocide. And that, I think, we should place on the agenda for 1992 as well. As a matter of fact, the group that I'm working with in the Bay Area is going to attempt to use the evidence that we collect by holding hearings against hate violence in communities as well as in a large setting on a particular weekend towards the end of the year. We want to use that evidence as documentation for possible lawsuits based on the genocide law. And I'm not suggesting that we will actually be successful in doing that, but we have to fight back. We have to. That is the only way we're going to bring about any change. And I'm tired of seeing the David Dukes and all of the grand cyclops and the wizards and the lizards and all of them, continue since they were founded in 1866, and they won't die. They won't die because of the fact that their existence is very much tied to a social system that is nurtured by and in turn nurtures racism and sexism and homophobia. Okay, and I think we have time for one more question. Okay,
All right.
There's time for one
Real
more
short.
question.
Angela, you're rightly named. You are an angel. Now here's my condensed song and poem for you. There's the word veritas there. It means truth. You illuminate that word truth. The last time I heard you did an exegesis on what little moonlight can do as sung by an African-American woman. Now what I want to do is say to you, your life is a song, a poem. You do things charged with meaning to the highest degree. And when you speak, there's an overlay of music. It's called truth and beauty. And you are the song. You are the angel that lights the night. We celebrate your beautiful mind, your soul. You sing into our hearts the music to make us move, to change the world. Angel.